Welcome to the Theology of the Buddy podcast, a podcast for Catholics who love tradition and want more of it. This is episode 42. On today's episode, Brooke and Mike are joined by Jobe of Our Lady's Armory to discuss his journey to the traditional Latin Mass, devotion to Our Lady through the Most Holy Rosary, and how Our Lady aids men to grow in virtue and holiness. So come on in. Pour yourself a glass and take a seat. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Theology of the Buddy podcast. I am joined with my co-host.
And husband.
And
Mike.
husband. Yep. And we are spending an evening with Jobe from Our Lady's Armory. We share a mutual friend, David Rummelhoff, which we interviewed not too long ago. Somehow I managed to convince him to play D&D with us. That was fun.
You got to be careful who you say that around.
How about the internet? Is that... Oh, I guess we're not being careful.
We're going to bring back the satanic panic from the 80s.
Yep.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, no, they play D&D.
Jack Chick is going to find out. Next thing you know, the whole South will be in arms against us.
By the
no.
South, you mean...
The South of Merca. That's what I mean. Yeah.
I got to ask you a question, and this is very, very important. From where you're from, are you familiar with Cincinnati spaghetti?
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so this is basically spaghetti noodles with chili on top of it, correct?
For the listener,
That's correct.
Correct.
he's from
Yeah.
Cincinnati.
Yes. Well, yes and no. I'm from Dayton, which is about an hour north of Cincinnati, and moved here almost 4 years ago. So,
All right.
But yes, growing up not too far from Cincinnati, I'm very familiar with a lot of the food and culture surrounding that food. Spaghetti noodles topped with chili, and you could put cheese and oyster crackers and just about anything that you would put on chili, you would put on this spaghetti concoction.
Okay, follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like ketchup?
I don't dislike ketchup.
Okay, would you put ketchup on spaghetti?
Probably not. I feel as though pasta of the caliber of spaghetti deserves something finer than ketchup. There are myriad other tomato-based sauces that one could put on spaghetti that are not ketchup.
So you're saying you wouldn't put ketchup on Cincinnati-style spaghetti?
It sounds pretty basic. So
Yeah, definitely basic. Another follow-up question, and this one's dedicated to Chris. What do you think the canonical penalty should be for putting ketchup on a spaghetti sauce?
oh man. So where I'm from, and I just said I'm not from here, but in Cincinnati, there's a tradition of climbing the steps at Mount Adams. There's a church up at the top of the hill. There's a lot of hills in Cincinnati, and there's a church at the top of the hill that penitents will climb up the steps of this hill on their knees during Lent, and I think that would be an appropriate canonical penance for
Nice.
indulging in such a disgrace.
Yeah.
Now I make homemade pasta sauce, and I pride myself in it. Like, it's wholesome, it's delicious. I've basically got it down to an art, and
It's not ketchup.
it's not ketchup. But without naming any names, Chris will put ketchup on spaghetti, even if there's already beautiful marinara sauce.
It makes us cry.
It makes us cry. He was convinced that perhaps there was a chance that someone from Cincinnati who ate Cincinnati-style spaghetti would say, oh yeah, ketchup would be fine on said dish.
I never said I ate Cincinnati spaghetti or Cincinnati chili, but
Yeah,
I
he
am
just knows what
familiar
it
with
is.
but yeah, I that's not something I partake in, even without ketchup.
I don't know. I think your proposed penalty was pretty lenient, but okay. All right. Chris, you have your penance. Go do it.
Yeah, and stop putting ketchup on my spaghetti. We call it penny spaghetti. We love you, Chris. Please stop hurting yourself and us. So let's get right into this. Could you share a little bit about yourself with us and the listeners? Mike and I both know that you're in the business of making rosaries and what I consider proper Catholic accessories.
How'd you get into that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to tell that story. This all started in 2015. My wife and I, who were just courting at the time, had been talking about marriage and the possibility of marriage. And I knew that I wanted to do something a bit more unique for her than just give her an engagement ring to propose. I thought, well, what could be better than a custom rosary? So I went looking for one, and really wasn't anything that caught my attention as something that really captured her personality and her essence. So I decided I'll just make one. My sister, my older sister, does a lot of crafting, and she had some experience to help share with me about how to string beads together and how to source materials and things like that. So went out and bought the parts, bought the tools, and made a rosary to propose with a ring too. I didn't do this without a ring. But yeah, so I made my first rosary that way in summer of 2015. She said yes, obviously. And afterwards, I still had the parts and everything, leftover parts and the tools from it, and realized I want a rosary now too. I want something meaningful for me. All the rosaries that I had looked for in the shops, 99% of them were either very, very feminine or very cheap and plastic, or very obviously said made in China or something like that. Mm-hmm. Decided to make a rosary for myself and thought, I could keep doing this. And so I did. And I opened up my shop on Etsy on October 7th, Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, 2015. And just shared it with family and friends, and it started to take off. So here I am almost 4.5 years later, and I've had, 1,000 or more orders across all the platforms I work on. I've gone to multiple events. I've expanded from chain link rosaries with gemstones and glass beads to paracord rosaries and combat rosaries. I do chain mail. I do Catholic cufflinks and tie bars, fridge magnets, vinyl stickers, you name it. I guess in a nutshell, the whole point and purpose behind all of this was to craft something meaningful and durable and long-lasting that you couldn't get in any shop. That really has, a sense of personality to it. And really, like I said, since so many of these rosaries were pretty feminine styles, I wanted something more masculine, because I thought, if I'm having trouble finding a manly rosary, I bet most of the other men out there looking for a Catholic rosary are also having that difficulty. So that's my primary audience is other Catholic men. But of course, I make for women too, and women have men in their lives to buy for. So yeah, that's kind of where Our Lady's Armory came from, and hopefully the purpose behind all of that is evident in the name of the shop alone.
I wanted to ask you about there was this whole Twitter uproar or debate recently about feminine and masculine rosaries. I don't know if you are on Twitter much, but did you see any of that?
I am not on Twitter. I have a profile on Twitter, but I never use it. I used it pretty extensively a while back, but really the only thing keeping me from deleting the whole thing is just laziness. I seem to recall seeing some things recently about masculine spiritualities and feminine spiritualities, and there seems to be some debate in certain circles about how legitimate those different expressions are. So it doesn't surprise me that that's come up with rosaries. But can you fill me in a little bit more about what that was about?
It was an ad for a online shop that makes rosaries. It wasn't your shop, but I think it was one named after St. Maximilian Kolbe, and they had an ad that said something like, "Men, don't settle for a feminine rosary, get one of our manly rosaries." Some lady screenshotted this ad and was just like, "Catholic men, what's going on? Like, can't you guys just pray the rosary and blah, blah, blah." I was surprised how many Catholics on Twitter were like, "Yeah, what the heck? That's offensive," and stuff. And then people were hitting back. It was a big argument. As an aside, the lady that started the whole argument wasn't even Catholic. She was actually a Protestant woman priest.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And that made me even more surprised how many Catholics were like, oh yeah, she's right about how we should pray the rosary and stuff. She clearly knows all about how the distinction between male and female should work, a Protestant priestess. But yeah.
I think that's very, very true on social media, that if somebody has a strong opinion or a strong advertisement or something, as soon as somebody comes out with a contrary opinion, everybody wants to jump on that bandwagon. They want to be the firebrand. They want, because they want to be right and whatever it might be. But yeah, sure, there's some truth to that. You can pray the rosary on a feminine rosary. You can pray the rosary on your fingers if you have two hands. And if one of your hands has caused you to sin, and if you've already cut it off, you can pray the rosary on one hand by just counting on your 5 fingers twice. So really, there's any number of things, the natural world around us, that you can count up to 10, which, by the way, I think if Jesus had intended for us to use the metric system, he would have had 10 apostles, but that's another story entirely.
Okay, them's fighting words.
But no, I mean, like I said, there's some truth to that. You can pray the rosary on anything that will help you count towards your 10 Hail Marys for each decade. Ultimately, it's just an aid. The physical rosary itself is not the rosary itself. The rosary is the prayers. But on the other hand, there's definitely something to be said about what is attractive to the senses. And those things are different for men and for women. Basically, what I'm saying is men and women find different things attractive for different reasons. And so if you have a rosary in front of you that is not attractive to you, I think you'll be less inclined to pick it up and use it than if you have one that means something to you.
Right. It's not to say you can't pray with, a rosary that isn't like matched to you specifically, but just that it's better to have the encouragement rather than discouragement, right?
Right.
So that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. I do pray with a very feminine rosary from time to time. It's one that I made for my grandmother before she passed. And so that rosary holds a lot of sentimental value to me. So it's not just about the physical properties of the rosary that make it attractive or not attractive. So there's a whole lot that goes into it beyond just what it looks like.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that was worth mentioning that's not really a masculine feminine thing, but you mentioned all the made in quality, the opposite of that, made in China.
Made without quality.
I think especially when it comes to something like a sacramental, there's an element of, worthiness, I guess, for something that's to be dedicated to be used for prayer.
Yes.
It's not just a commercial product. It's an aid. It's I don't want to say tool, but
Well, it is in a sense.
Yeah.
But it's, something that's blessed and set aside for God, right? So it's kind of analogous to how a church should be beautiful, and all the things used at Mass and stuff like that should be beautiful and worthy of what they're used for, in a lesser way than those, but in the same sense. Right? A rosary should be beautiful and well made, ideally.
Right. And I think that's kind of like the difference between praying the hours on a smartphone versus praying from a breviary. There's all different ways you can pray the hours, and it's not like you didn't pray them if you prayed them from your smartphone. There's times and contexts in which that's perfectly appropriate. But, if you're walking into the chapel from the rectory and you're the parish priest and you pull out your smartphone to pray the office and your parishioners see you, what is that? What kind of message does that broadcast? When there's a perfectly good set of breviary books sitting on the table in the sacristy or whatever. Yeah,
it's like a missed opportunity to witness there.
Yeah,
potentially.
I'll say a quick story because what you said made me think of it. Last year, so my grandmother passed away, and she was very much dedicated to praying her rosary, every day, and everybody in the family knew that she was always praying for you, and if you had something going on, like a test, or she would say that she would pray for you. So when she passed away, I took the roses from the bouquet that were on her casket. I dried them, and I made beads with clay and the rose petals. And how many did I make? I think I made 15 rosaries, and I gave them to all of her children. then she had 7 children, because I wanted them to carry on the act of praying the rosary, because now that she's gone, we need to pray for her.
Yeah.
And someone has to carry on the legacy of praying for the family, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
that's
because she's passed, we now have I don't want to say a job, but a duty in a sense to pray for those loved ones that have passed away. And yeah, when you brought up the rosary that you had made your grandmother, it made me think of that similar experience. I mean, yeah. I look back and I'm going, oh dear, maybe these are going to be pretty horrendous looking in 10 years, but I hope they aren't, because the purpose of them was to encourage the family to pray the rosary if they haven't already started, but to also continue that and do it for her and pray for her. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Do you have a story about how you came into the faith? Have you always been a Catholic, or?
Yeah. I've been a Catholic all my life. I went to Catholic school K through 12. I went to a secular college, and I'm at nominally Catholic at least, university for my master's degree right now. Yeah, I wouldn't say that there was ever a point that I fell away or reverted, or there was no grand, opening of the clouds or anything like that kind of moment for me in my life. But I can definitely look back and see just a gradual development of the faith for myself and for my entire family. I'm the second of 6. And when I was very young, we didn't go to Mass every Sunday, but we tried to. I know that I was, I think I was almost 14 months old when I was baptized, which by our standards today, that's pushing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
and
God
by
nothing
ancient
happened
standards
to me.
too, right?
Right. But, we'd go to Mass most Sundays, but not every Sunday. And I remember maybe around age 4 or 5, we saw the parish priest walking down the sidewalk after Mass, and I asked my parents, "Is that God?" And everybody had a hearty laugh, but I didn't understand why they were laughing, because it was an honest question from a 4-year-old. Over time, we started to say grace before meals, and we were going to Mass every Sunday, and I started serving at the altar in 5th grade. At that time, it was common for school children to serve starting in 6th or 7th, and so it was a little unusual that a 5th grader was going up there. I think maybe that would be the moment or the thing in my life that really started to open things up for me, was serving the Mass. It felt dignified and it felt set apart, felt like a deeper and more mysterious way to participate in the faith. And I don't know that I can put it into words very succinctly right now without giving it a lot of thought, but I served for a very long time, from 5th grade all the way through college. Oh, wow. I was serving Sunday Mass or daily Mass at the chapel on campus. Yeah, it's just been kind of gradually growing and learning and falling and getting back up and coming to appreciate all of the beauty and the richness that we have in the Catholic tradition.
Cool. Recently, from what I understand, is you started attending the traditional Latin Mass. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually attended my first one in high school. I was the kid that didn't want to take Spanish or French in high school because that's what everybody else was doing, so I took Latin.
Okay.
At that time, the priestly fraternity of St. Peter had just started offering Latin Mass within the last year or two at my parish, and I didn't realize it. It was very quiet. It wasn't advertised, at least not in any way that I knew about. But somehow my Latin teacher found out about it, and he organized a field trip for us. And so we went out, and it was my sophomore year of high school, going to low Mass for the first time, and I was totally lost. But loved it, absolutely loved it, and went back, I don't know, months or maybe a year or two later. It was a long time before I was able to get back again. Eventually, that community was given their own parish in Dayton, and I started attending there pretty regularly. When I started my graduate program, Elizabeth and I would go to low Mass on Friday mornings, and then we would go to Panera for breakfast afterwards. And since we've been married, we mostly attend a Novus Ordo parish near us, but the last few weeks we've been going to a Latin parish just over the river. And it's just, you can't come anywhere close to the beauty and the mystery, I think, that's in that Mass.
Yeah.
Whether it's low Mass or high Mass or solemn high or I've never been to a pontifical before, but I would love the opportunity.
I got to go to one.
Oh, man.
Cardinal Burke.
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
Envy right here. But each one of those different kinds of the extraordinary form is just so rich. You know, if you just read the descriptions, it's like, oh, well, this one is just the same as this one, but they sing and they add more candles. It's like, well, yeah, but there's a lot more that you can pull from that. There's a lot more opportunity to experience the Mass in different ways, whether you're experiencing just the almost total silence of the prayers at low Mass, or whether you're experiencing the uplifting angelic choruses of the high Mass. You know, there's just such richness and so much to unpack in that liturgy.
Yeah.
It's definitely a favorite of mine.
We've realized a lot of that over like the few years that we've been going to the Latin Mass every Sunday, but also even just doing the last few podcasts where we're doing this liturgical breakdown series, and we've been going through the Novus Ordo, traditional Latin Mass, and Eastern Divine Liturgy, and just comparing the prayers and rites piece by piece, noticing so many more little beautiful pieces. Yeah, it just feels like there's so much more depth to discover there still for us.
Yeah.
We kind of went on like Catholic overload first year that we were married. We would there's no way that we would be able to do this now with an 18-month-old. But for Triduum that year, on Holy Thursday, we went to a Dominican parish near us, and that was the parish that we belonged to at the time. It was Novus Ordo, but it was gorgeous.
A unicorn?
Yes, it was a unicorn. It was that very, very rare, reverent, beautiful, flawless Novus Ordo.
Yep.
In the vernacular, no less. The Holy Thursday liturgy is one of the most beautiful in the year anyway. So we went there. And then Friday that year happened to be Good Friday, March 25th, which typically is the solemnity of the Annunciation, right? But when it falls on Good Friday in the Western Church, it gets transferred. So we Latins didn't celebrate Annunciation until like a week after Easter or something. But in the Eastern traditions, they don't move that feast. And so there's a Byzantine church up in Columbus that celebrated Divine Liturgy for Good Friday and the Annunciation, like at the same time. So it was like a dual Mass.
Whoa.
So we did the Novus Ordo on Thursday night. We drove all the way up to Columbus while fasting all day. We did the Black Fast that day.
Oh, gosh.
And went to that liturgy, which was like 3 hours long. And then came back. And then Saturday night, we went to the Easter Vigil at a Latin Mass parish. It started at like 11:30 or midnight or something. And the church was in total darkness for the first 2 hours because they did all of the lessons before getting to the Gloria and turning all the lights on and everything. And so we didn't get home till like 3:30 or 4 in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
But it was this whole experience of like the liturgical gamut of, you know, you had Novus Ordo and Divine Liturgy and not just the Divine Liturgy, but like the Divine Liturgy of Divine Liturgies.
Yeah.
And then Holy Saturday, Easter Vigil Mass, all in the span of 3 days.
Oh, wow.
It was
that would be very, very hard with a 18-month-old.
It was wild.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Speaking of Triduum, the one thing I really want to experience, but I haven't yet, is that that pre-55 Triduum. They have that down in Detroit.
At the Grotto?
No, not the Grotto. The Institute of Christ the King does it.
Oh, okay.
And Chris and Julie have gone to that, but we haven't got a chance to go. Yeah, I've heard that there's a lot different specifically in those, even compared to the 1962 Latin Mass that we're used to.
Yeah, I've heard the same. I have a Baronius Press missal. I don't have anything pre-1962 to look at, and I have never bothered to dive into those differences. The Holy Week changes are well known in the blogosphere, it seems like, but I don't know much about them.
Yeah, it's like the first strike of Bunini, but Anyways, yeah. This is kind of like a little bit open-ended, so feel free to interpret the question as you see fit. But we wanted to talk about the relationship of manliness and devotion to Our Lady in general. I know that it's something that for some people, I guess, on a surface level, it might not have the appearance of being something masculine, I guess, especially in the sense that our culture likes to define manliness and stuff like that. But it's the Catholic Church in general has a much different view, right? We see all like our male saints and stuff having great devotion to Our Lady, and we see it as something that's fitting for men. Is that something that you've kind of thought about or come to understand in your life or struggled with at all?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The first thing that comes to mind is the example of the saints. Our daughter's middle name is Immaculata in honor of St. Maximilian Kolbe and in honor of Our Lady. Maximilian Kolbe had the most incredible devotion to Our Lady. You know, he founded the Militia Immaculata, which is still in operation to this day.
We're both part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sorry, I said about instead of a boat.
Didn't understand what you were saying there.
Yeah, you need a translator.
It's a boot.
But yeah, the lives of the male saints, so many of them have had such a devotion to Our Lady and to the Rosary. You know, I think about Pius V, who instituted the Feast of Our Lady of Victory, which later became the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, because he asked members of the Holy League fleet to pray the Rosary for victory at that battle, at the Battle of Lepanto, when the Turkish fleet was, ready to take over Europe. He had a devotion to Our Lady, and he inspired a devotion to Our Lady among, however many tens of thousands of Christian soldiers were part of that. And I read, maybe about a year ago, in a book called 10 Battles Every Catholic Should Know. Battle of Lepanto is in there.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And I realized that, it's got a couple chapters actually. I didn't realize that this was not just a Christian fleet. It was not just a Catholic fleet. There were Protestants, there were Jews, there were Muslims who opposed the Ottoman Empire, who were part of the sailing force on the Holy League ships. And many of them prayed the Rosary. Many of them went to confession and participated at Mass, and the battle was won. I think of John Paul II and his great devotion to Our Lady. But I think ultimately the best example there is Christ. There can be no better example of virtue, of strength, of manliness, if you want to put it that way, of virility, of integrity, of any possible virtue that you could think of and articulate. Christ possessed them in their fullness, every single one of them. And he was totally devoted to his mother. Being a faithful and observant Jew, he would have observed all of the commandments. Commandment number 4 is honor your father and mother. And for 30 years of his life, he was obedient to Mary and Joseph in their home. So that, we get, when he was born and the last 3 years of his life, which is a very small amount over his 33 years here on earth. Mary and Joseph got him for 30. They had him in their home without prying eyes of men and women in the 21st century for 30 full years, where they were totally devoted to each other. They were totally devoted to our Lord in their mission. I think if a man is struggling with the idea of Marian devotion as an expression of masculinity, I think Christ is the perfect place to look for a role model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better, really.
I also got to mention, St. Louis de Montfort and how much he encourages everyone to be devoted to Our Lady, because it's through her that there is victory over every sin and struggle and whatnot. And what better way to approach Christ than with his mother? There's this image that someone described me where, you go up to Our Lady and she helps wipe your face and she helps wipe your tears and she leads you to her son. Like, he's never going to turn away and push away from his mother.
I think it's Scott Hahn who has spoken or written pretty extensively about the Gebirah, the Queen Mother of the Davidic Kingdom, and how, even when the kings of Israel had many wives, obviously there's going to be some competition among them, who's the king going to listen to? But there was only ever one mother of the king. And so people would know that if they wanted something from the king, they would go to his mother, because she had his ear, above any other woman in his life.
And she also held the title of queen, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's another image. I don't know where this one comes from. Maybe it's in Louis or one of the other saints, but we bring our gifts to the Lord, to our King. Christ the King is my absolute favorite devotion, favorite title of our Lord ever. But so we bring our gifts to the King, and we're just poor, simple farmers, and we have a meager crop, and it may not appear the best. There may be some worms crawling in it. It may be kind of dirty. We're bringing the first fruits to the Lord, and Mary steps in, and she takes this crop and she cuts out the bad pieces and she arranges it on a silver platter, and presents this beautiful arrangement to the King on our behalf. And I love that image too, of Mary really interceding for us.
It reminded me of another Louis de Montfort expression, I guess. And it's kind of immature of me, but I always liked it as like a dunk on the Protestants. But he talked about, this is in True Devotion to Mary. He talks about how there's this expression of being slaves to Our Lady, which was considered offensive by the Protestants. And he talks about how...
And offensive by modern ears, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He talks about how if any foolish people are offended by it, then you have to explain that, of course, it's truly being slaves to Jesus through Mary, but that it's so obvious it just kind of goes without saying, unless you're talking to someone extremely foolish. But it was so funny how he put that. I'm sorry if anyone's listening and they were offended by this. I'm not calling you foolish. Blame St. Louis de Montfort. That just made me laugh. Anyways, total tangent.
That's fine. We're all about that here.
I can't even be reminded of that quote without just
giggling,
laughing at it. So it's so amusing. Anyway.
So practically speaking, maybe you guys can enlighten me. How does devotion to Our Lady help men be men, practically and spiritually, or how it's helped you grow in what would the word be?
Virtue.
Yeah.
Masculinity. Maturity.
Yeah. I think I'll go back to graduate school, beginning of graduate school for this. I had an opportunity to go to the Seek conference in 2015. It was in Memphis that year. And I picked up a book called The Little Oratory from Sophia Institute Press. That book taught me a lot about how to build a prayer space at home. And I was totally into this. So I set up a space in my tiny little apartment on campus and started putting up all these pictures and holy cards that I had gathered from Seek and from other places. And 90% of them were Our Lady. And I gravitated to that space daily when I was struggling, when I was in over my head with my graduate schooling. And I was surrounded by pictures of Mary. That time in my life helped me cultivate a deeper appreciation for Our Lady's presence, especially for her beauty. There's a quote from John Paul II that it is the dignity of every woman is the duty and the obligation of every man.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, but this growing and deepening appreciation for Our Lady's beauty and dignity and her blessedness above all creation. At that point, I became aware that the church has proclaimed her to be the crown of all creation. You know, in the creation story, Eve was created last. And so Mary is a fulfillment of what Eve was supposed to have been. So Mary truly is the crown of all creation. And so this experience helped to kind of draw out of me a deeper appreciation for all of the women in my life, for my own mother, for my sisters, for all the girl space friends that I had around me. You know, it's very, very easy in college, especially, to kind of go along with the culture and to kind of slip into a mindset of objectification of, you know, other people exist to serve me. I'm looking out for myself. And that was kind of always in the back of my mind through college, was this fighting against this. But it was always kind of that. It was fighting against it. And this time in my life at which I developed such a deep appreciation for Our Lady and for her beauty, it was no longer fighting against, but fighting for something good, recognizing the inherent dignity and the inherent beauty in everyone around me. That was a time in my life when I referred to her very frequently as Mama Mary, and still do occasionally, but have to be careful who you say that around, because you run into some types who are like, oh, that's disrespectful and that's too intimate. And, you know, I remind them of scripture when Christ calls God the Father Abba, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's one example in my own life of how devotion to Our Lady, I feel, has helped me to grow in virtue and to cultivate a sense of virtue in my own life and how I see other people, how I interact with them. What about you, Mike?
I don't know if I have as profound of an example. I was thinking of a couple things, like on the theoretical side, you talked about the creation of man and woman, and recall how the man's created first and God creates the woman, Eve, basically saying it's not good for the man to be alone, and almost as if he is incomplete and not himself, which I think is, like, in a very real sense, as a human being, as a male, you don't really make sense without the female side of the human race. So you can't really be, I think, like fully a man or a good man anyway without having a healthy interaction and relationship to women. The one like life moment I was thinking back to was when we did our consecration when we were dating. Do you remember that, Brooke?
Vaguely. It's been a really long time.
Yeah, it's been a few years.
What, like 8?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Long time.
Yeah, we did it together. The like St. Louis de Montfort preparation and stuff, and we were reading True Devotion to Our Lady together. It's hard to remember like specifics from back then, but it must have had an effect on
Did something.
our relationship.
Yeah. I think it was just like a shared goal.
Yeah.
Something where both of us were looking towards and like willing to pray for each other to achieve holiness, asking Our Lady to help us to be holy, whether or not that was, you know, with us getting married or not. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like, this is beyond us to dedicate ourselves to Our Lady. Like, we can't do anything without her.
I guess the other thing is it's kind of like, you know, how with natural parents, how a child turns out or how a child grows up is hugely affected by having healthy relationships with both parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like, imagine growing up and not knowing or having a relationship with your mother versus having that healthy relationship. It has a lot of, I think, effects that are hard to pin down, but kind of affect everything in your life. So,
yeah, I want to go back to something you said just a minute ago about learning how to have healthy relationships with women in your life. And I think that is very, very true. I think that how a boy treats his mother, and as he grows up, how a man treats his mother, tells you everything about how he's going to treat his spouse.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're a man who disrespects your mother, who doesn't give her the time of day, doesn't care for her as she ages, all of those kinds of things, how will your spouse be able to reasonably expect that you'll treat her better? I think having a good relationship with Our Lady teaches us a lot about what it means to have a good relationship with, not just with other women or with women in our lives, but with other men, as fellow sons of Our Lady as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that before. I wanted to ask your opinion on all the discussion around the various approved Marian apparitions and their kind of darker prophecies, like things in like La Salette and Fatima that talk about like corruption in the church and stuff like that, and stuff in La Salette where it says like Rome will lose the faith and stuff like that, like really disturbing stuff, but that was part of like apparitions that were actually approved by the Vatican and stuff. Do you think about that stuff, or do you just kind of like, I don't know, try to carry on and not think too far above yourself? I don't know how. Right. I often kind of struggle with how to respond to that kind of stuff.
Well, there's two things I want to say about it. First, I'm not super familiar with the apparitions at La Salette. I'm familiar with Lourdes and Fatima. Those are the two big ones that I know of. I've heard of La Salette before, but I don't know much about it.
It's not really talked about that much. I feel like it's only just recently that people have. I mean, Dr. Taylor Marshall kind of mentioned it. I was like, oh, this is a thing? Oh, I haven't heard of this. Everybody talks about Fatima a lot. So
yeah, it's a little older, I think, and there's not as many miracles and stuff associated with the site of it and stuff, so it doesn't have as big of a following, but it is an approved Marian apparition.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say with that being in mind is that in general, I believe that the church has approved the apparitions that she has because there is something for us to learn and something for us to take from them. And you're right, they're not all happy clappy, we're all going to heaven kind of stories. These are these apparitions like at Fatima, there are very, very clear and disturbing visions of hell that are experienced by young children who apparently were so frightened and terrified of this that they were forever changed by these visions, these apparitions. Yeah, without getting into specifics of each one or knowing a whole lot about all of them, there's something behind those apparitions that we need to pay attention to. Now, whether you take them literally or metaphorically, as you said, I think in La Salette, one of the apparitions was that Rome would lose the faith. I don't know anything about that one, but whether we take that literally, that the Roman Church will lose the faith, I personally find that one bordering on the impossible, simply because of the words given to us by Christ.
I would agree with that. Like, the entire Roman Church can't lose the faith.
Right. But on the other hand, is there a sense in which that could be metaphorically true? And what I mean by that is it possible that there would be such a massive falling away from the faith that could get into all levels of the church? We've had this before. This is not new. The Arian heresy is a perfect example. Even the Pope was an Arian at that time, but
or at
the
least
church,
very sympathetic to it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But the church persisted.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say there is a possibility that this could literally happen. And what I mean by that is the seat of the papacy has not always been in Rome. God forbid World War III starts tomorrow and somebody bombs Vatican City. What's going to happen? The church will survive. The church will persist because Christ promised that it would. But if it gets nuked off the face of the earth, then, well, the church can't persist in Rome. Maybe they'll move back to, I don't know, Versailles or wherever, somewhere over the mountains, and we can be ultramontane again. But no, so that's the first thing that I wanted to say about those. And I'm not a theologian. I'm not a canonist. I'm not an expert in scriptural exegesis or prophecy or any of those kinds of things. So I'm just a simple layman. And so that kind of dovetails into the second thing that I want to say, is that we are living in an age where information is more easily accessible than at any other point in human history. And so we can read everything about Fatima or Lourdes or La Salette or, you name it, over the course of a day or a weekend or whatever. Somebody living 100 years ago, it would have taken ages for this kind of information to be disseminated among the faithful.
Yeah,
and
even someone living when La Salette or Lourdes or Fatima apparitions happened, for it to spread across the world took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I try to remind myself of that pretty often because there are a lot of things that can get discouraging and can lead you to despondency or despair if you let them. The important thing is, as has been the case throughout all of human history, what are the essentials? What's the most fundamental thing that we need to pay attention to? It's Christ in the Eucharist. It's remaining faithful to the commandments of Holy Mother Church. And so, as I said, I'm not familiar with La Salette. And as far as I'm aware, the church doesn't say that you are required to express a belief in these apparitions. The church only says these are approved apparitions. And so in that sense, there's no requirement, there's no binding on my conscience to pay attention to them. As callous as that may sound, it's important to remember that sometimes so as not to get discouraged. So yeah, to your point, keep your head down, keep the faith, pray your rosary, go to mass, go to confession, and work out your salvation in fear and trembling. Don't get caught up in the talking heads and, the blogosphere and all of the things that are, yes, some of it may be helpful and some of it may give you some things that will encourage you and help you to grow in your path of holiness. But that's not where you get your source and summit. That's not where you get your grace from.
Yeah, if it becomes an obsession,
yes,
it can be.
It can be dangerous.
It can have the total opposite effect. It could just lead you to anger and despair.
Yeah,
really.
There's a healthy way of looking at them, right? And you're not supposed to obsess about the doom and gloom to the point of losing hope and stuff like that, right? It's true what you said, that just because an apparition is approved doesn't mean it's necessarily true, like infallibly. It's been approved as being worthy and not opposed to the faith. But I think that's as far as the approval of the church goes for these things. The one thing I think can be of value in seeing some of these like darker things talked about for the layperson is sometimes just thinking about the fact that this kind of thing is foreseen. If you see terrible things happening in the church or bad things being done by people in the hierarchy of the church, you can remind yourself that Our Lady has warned us that things like this are going to happen, and what has she told us to do about it? Primarily to keep the faith and pray the rosary and stuff like that, right? Especially at Fatima, the rosary is like especially emphasized, right? Yeah, and then, things that could be described as something terrible like Rome losing the faith have happened before, as you said. I even think about, they call it the Saeculum Obscurum, or like the dark age of the papacy, where there was like a string of really terrible popes in a row. This is all around the year 1000 or so, but there were like popes trying to set up successors and like having each other kidnapped and selling the papacy. And then one guy sold the papacy and then got it back. Same guy. At this time, you could easily have said that Rome has lost the faith because these popes were obviously faithless men, and, the church was, a really terrible place. But, it wasn't forever, even though it did last quite a while. It was not forever. And in the grand scheme of the church, it's almost forgotten at this point in history. Yeah, I think you make a good point that you can't let it distract you from what matters, like living the faith and loving our Lord and, living out your state in life. If you look at these prophecies and stuff like that, you've got to look at it in a healthy way and prayerfully and use it to your spiritual profit, right? It's cool. I liked your answer a lot. It's very wise.
I like to think, well, I don't like to think. Unfortunately, what we've seen...
You don't like to think. Uh-oh.
I hate thinking. It's so much work.
We've
Rolls for intelligence.
I think all of us have grown up with a very similar experience with bad art, bad music, and for lack of a better definition, a sort of chicken soup for the soul and precious moments phenomenon that we've encountered in our faith life. There's been a big pushback against this happy clappy, flowery painted picture of Catholicism that we're seeing pushed with tradition. I think we're seeing more traditional-minded men standing up tall and taking on the duty to protect traditional Catholicism and
protect and revive it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say on that, guys? Like
the field medics on the video game board of whatever. I lost my analogy in midstream there. But
field hospital of the church.
Yeah.
If you take that analogy in its proper way and not an excuse for sacrilegious communion.
Yes. Your use of the word revive made me think of that image.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good discussion. It's worth having. And I have it frequently with some friends of mine online from college. They're also very traditionally minded. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a rad trad in the sense that, the Novus Ordo is invalid and,
we hate you if you go to Novus Ordo. We're not those people.
Just kidding.
Exactly.
Chris and I, in the last podcast, because we were sort of criticizing some very Novus Ordo, pro Novus Ordo guys, we had to start off by saying, we don't hate you and blah, blah, blah. And I just summed it up as saying, we're not rad trads, we're dad trads.
I like that. There is definitely in my own heart a sense of loss when I go to a Latin Mass and then when I go to a Novus Ordo after having attended a Latin Mass recently. I just shake my head and just think, how much have we done away with? How much have they stripped from our churches? How much have they taken away from our patrimony? Mm-hmm. Yes, I said patrimony. I know that's an unpopular word. It's like patriarchy, right? Same root. But this is the Mass that formed not countless, 15, 16, 1700 years worth of saints.
Yeah.
In our church.
Yeah.
And yes, certainly the same can be said of the Eastern liturgies as well. Mm-hmm. But to go from that, once you've experienced that, and then to go back to, as Christ called them while he was referring to people in the Gospels, but whitewashed tombs, that's what a lot of modern churches feel like. Mm-hmm. To go back to that and sing something written for who knows what congregation or what sect, because there's a few composers, I feel as though not many Catholics know this. There are some composers in our Catholic hymnals that are not Catholic and have written these hymns for any number of denominations, even non-Trinitarian ones, Unitarians and Church of God and whatever those other really far out ones are. They're using the same hymns, and that's kind of frightening. What does that say about our Christology, our ecclesiology? If we can assent to what's in these hymns the same as they can, despite, an insurmountable doctrinal divide, well, that tells me that there's nothing of value in this hymn to begin with, really. Yay, we believe in God. Okay, which God? Because your God as a Unitarian is not the same as our Trinitarian God, one God in three persons. So we've gone from 15 centuries of this tradition to suddenly we're just going to throw it all out. We're going to whitewash everything. We're going to replace the stained glass windows with clear glass. We're going to write brand new hymns that anybody can use. It just makes me sad, and it breaks my heart to think about how this rich tradition developed organically over the life of the church, and we're just gonna gut it. And it's not just the Mass. When we got rid of the Rogation days, the Ember days.
Yeah.
I only just found out about the Ember days 4 or 5 years ago. I found out about the Rogation days maybe 2 years ago. And only last year I found out that the Ember days are actually for something. Each set of Ember days corresponds to a particular harvest. The grape harvest for the precious blood, the wheat harvest for the Eucharist, these different things. And there's so much of that's been lost. And so we're doing our very, very small part in our family to bring it back, to recover those traditions, because there's such joy in them.
There's something to be said about hard work. We discussed it in a chat, the word effeminate. And it's been discussed on the podcast too, is not wanting to do hard work.
In the sense that Aquinas used it distinct from femininity, for any listeners who didn't hear the earlier podcast about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a big gripe with that word, because so many people use it without knowing where it comes from and how to use it properly. Yes, in English, etymologically, it does derive from the same root as female or feminine, but that's kind of a sexist carryover from earlier English usage. In the original Latin, it did not have that connotation. The Latin word is molities. It means softness, as a vice that opposes perseverance. And so there's people on the one side who use the word effeminate very liberally, and anything they don't like is effeminate. And then there's the people in the pews who don't know what's going on, and they hear that and they think feminine is bad.
Yeah.
That's not what's being said here.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right in the Thomistic sense of the word effeminate in our English language, or molities in the Summa. This vice of being soft or weak-willed or weak-tempered, or I think he describes it as yielding under pressure. Yeah. That you don't stand firm. You're not standing your ground. You're not courageous and strong.
Yeah. As soon as you have to suffer for something, then you give up. That's essentially
right. Yeah, and we do that so easily with fasting, and we have 2 days in the entire year that we're required to fast, and we whine about it. And is it really fasting?
Yeah.
You can have 3 meals. It's just 2 of them have to be pretty small.
Yeah, you're still going to eat. It's just going to be 2 snacks.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Contrast that with what they did 200 years ago or 100 years ago. Or, Taylor Marshall has a good one on his blog about Catholic Lent used to be tougher than Muslim Ramadan.
Wasn't it no meat, no dairy, and it had quite a few. It had quite a list of rules that you were to follow, and it sounded like it was really hard.
Yeah. And also abstaining from marital relations and stuff.
Yeah.
Black fasts on Good Friday and Ash Wednesday.
Yeah. Like the church has lost, well, not lost, but it's been kind of pushed aside these opportunities for its children to grow strong. Because unless you flex those muscles and really deny yourselves those earthly pleasures and those worldly things, and deny yourself, you really can't get stronger. And by denying yourself, and by going to Our Lady so that she can prepare you and help you while you're doing those things, then that's really where not only women but men obviously grow in virtue and holiness. It's by doing that hard work. And sometimes it can be hard to pick up your rosary and pray. I think we can all agree, at the end of the day, you just lay in bed, oh no, I forgot to pray my rosary. how often have we experienced a time where we just kind of dismiss it and roll over and go to bed? Mm-hmm. Or, where we just forget about it. Like, I don't think...
We've been there as parents where it seems like the task is so huge if you're like, short on sleep and you get to the end of the day and, spending 15 minutes on the rosary just seems like a huge task, but the
fruits are...
Yeah, and the grace is there to help you through it, for sure.
Yeah. St. Louis de Montfort says, if you say the rosary faithfully until death, I do assure you that, in spite of the gravity of your sins, you shall receive a never-fading crown of glory. Even if you are on the brink of damnation, even if you have one foot in hell, even if you have sold your soul to the devil as sorcerers do who practice black magic, and even if you are a heretic as obstinate as a devil, sooner or later you will be converted and will amend your life and save your soul. Mark well what I say, if you say the rosary devoutly every day until death, for the purpose of knowing the truth and obtaining contrition and pardon for your sins.
There you go.
I don't remember who said it, but there was a saint of the church that said, if you want to stop sinning, pray every day.
Yeah.
One of two things will happen. You'll either stop sinning or you'll stop praying. Mm-hmm. So obviously, if you're praying every day, you're going to be growing in holiness and putting your vices and your sins behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that grace is real. That comes from praying, especially with devotion every day. Mm-hmm. Like God wants us to ask for that grace, and He will give that grace generously if we ask. Mm-hmm. And He'll give us the ability to overcome those vices that seem insurmountable in our lives.
Mm-hmm. And if arming yourself with a rosary that best suits your drive, then do it.
You missed the middle of that sentence.
Sometimes a word. What was I going to say?
If that helps you.
Yeah, if that helps you, then make it a priority. It's important. Every swordsman has a sword that he feels most confident with. Yes. Every soldier must be confident in his weapon, just as we must be confident in the rosary that we hold in our hand. May it be the rosary that we have on our deathbed, that is worn and faded. There's something powerful about seeing those relics and rosaries that the saints once held, where the beads are so smoothed and whatnot because they were prayed so devoutly.
Yeah, it's like a sword that's covered in nicks and dents from battle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, Nick, this was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
To come back on again.
Yay!
Unless you're lying to me and I was terrible.
No!
In which case, I would definitely love to come back again and torment you a second time.
And teach us about the sin of lying, apparently.
Opportunities to do some penance and grow in holiness.
Yeah.
Tolerating my rambling.
No, this is great. I had a really great time.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks for the invitation.
I can't wait for Chris to hear about your thoughts on ketchup on spaghetti.
Yeah, ketchup does not belong on spaghetti. I was about to say I'm sorry, but I'm really not.
Would you try it?
You've been talking to Canadians for how long, and you're already just apologizing for everything, huh? I'm sorry.
So Nick, where can people reach you? Could you drop your website and your stores here?
Yeah, absolutely. So my apostolate, I guess, if you want to call it that, Our Lady's Armory, sturdy handcrafted gear for the battle-ready Catholic. You can find that at olarmory.com. For Canadian listeners, I spell that the American way, so it's OLARMORY. There's no U in Armory. So OLArmory.com. I also have a shop at Peter's Square. That's how David and I met, was through Peter's Square, and David is how I found out about this podcast. So shout out to David Rummelhoff for that. So you can find me there, OLArmory.com, and at Peter's Square as well. You can follow me on Instagram, on Facebook. I will be at the E6 Catholic Men's Conference in Indiana at the end of February. If anybody among your listeners is in that geographical area, I'll have a table there selling my rosaries and cufflinks and all kinds of other good stuff that I make.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. And
thanks so much.
If you enjoyed the podcast, you can look for us, Theology of the Buddy, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And leave us a comment. Let us know if you like the show or if you hated it. We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah. So from all of us at Theology of the Buddy, stay tratty.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. How has devotion to Our Lady influenced your Catholic faith? We'd love to know. Hit us up on Facebook and Instagram at Theology of the Buddy, on Twitter at TradFriends, or email us at theologyofthebuddy@gmail.com. Also, we would love for you to check out the great work of Nicholas Jobe over at Our Lady's Armory. You can check him out at olarmory.com. Hey, if you like what you heard today, we'd love for you to consider subscribing to us. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to great podcasts. Would you also please consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes? We greatly appreciate it, as it helps us to get noticed within the larger podcast community. Next week, the gang's back together again for their next installment of the Liturgical Breakdown. New episodes are released every Wednesday. So until then, stay tratty.